Hi, I'm your host, Michael, with Ernesto, Alex, Demetrius, and Hailey. We are talking about the land ethics. Now, tell me, what was striking about the land ethics chapter?
One thing I thought was impressive, but it made sense, was how with land ethics, our society is more either the word is ecological or economic, and how it's usually motivated by profit. And that makes sense considering everything is paid for or with money, and so therefore any attempts to revive a desolated landscape would require finance. And though the goal is to do it for ethical reasons, like for the good of the land itself, etc., it would still require money for it. And I think that makes sense. And that also made me consider, what if our society, how would that change if our society would function based on ethics and philosophy instead of currency and finance? And that's just some of my 2 cents.
I guess what I found striking about it was how how they talked about how we need to make ourselves learn and relearn the whole ecology, be more ethical about how we use our land, and the whole redefining land as something that isn't property but more something we should take care of, and how we should improve it for the ecosystem, not just us humans but also for the animals and plants around us.
Yeah, I gotta agree. And I'd like to add, I think they're going in the right direction, where they're asking us to imagine the land and the organisms and all of that as a biotic component. Considering we usually don't focus on an issue unless there's an extremely visible impact
or a monetary gain from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know.
Would you like to add anything?
Well, it just surprises me that after history has shown that usually conquering the land doesn't work because it does fail, it's surprising that the community or the city or wherever you are hasn't caught on to the idea that you live with the land, not over the land.
Right, and I think that brings up the point that people aren't living in a way that's beneficial to the earth. They're prioritizing themselves. So when we went back to our worldviews for, I believe it was Unit 1, Unit 2, where we had to align ourselves with a worldview that best described how we thought of things, I didn't feel like any of them fit me, because all of them were greatly concerning the benefit of the human population and not actually the benefit of the world itself.
Yeah, we should also be mindful that with any ecosystem on Earth, it can be destroyed or damaged by any human activity. So anything that we do could potentially have dire consequences for any organism out there and any type of ecosystem, even if it's a desert or an ocean.
So everything is finite?
Every resource is finite.
Yeah, but it takes money and time and organization to fix these problems, and we as a species don't have any of that. So we're more concerned with our own economics than we are saving the place that we are living.
Anyway, stuff like this needs to be more educated to the populace and how to protect and preserve our environment and world, because this is our only world we're going to get for now until Elon does Mars. But whatever, we should really work on protecting our environment and the people around us, as well as the animals and life itself around us, instead of just focusing on one species, the human race.
Well, seeing as we're talking about on how much that we care about the earth and whatnot, what does the land ethics mean to each of you?
Land ethics to me means being ethical and being careful of what you do on your land to make sure you don't cause any ill effects around the ecosystem or anything that you live or see, and make sure you don't really harm anything.
I think a simpler comparison would be, you have your own personal property, and whether encouraged or required, you do your best to reduce your ecological footprint and try to maximize self-sustainability.
So, care for your neighbor and whatnot.
More like, well, in the sense that your neighbor is your lawn, the trees, and any other animal will on the place on the section you call your property calling home, and just make sure you're not reducing that to a miniature wasteland or anything.
All right, and what about you, Ernesto?
I think one thing that stuck out to me, as they said, that also goes for me, but one thing that did stick out to me, and I did research, is we've really only done damage for about 100 or so years, but it would take around double or triple the time to fix any trouble or any harm that we've done to the environment.
Right, and that makes sense. But it's not all, you don't have to necessarily consider it a bad thing, it's just change. Earth has been changing for centuries and centuries, and it's something that is far beyond our control. So when you look at it, it depends on how you're looking at it, because yes, we are creating issues for the Earth, but that's just issues, and we're comparing it to what we already know. The Earth has been around much longer than we ever have.
Well, whenever it came to change is just a thing that happens, I feel like humans as a whole do cause change, because like oil fracking and whatnot, and how we don't replace it, that
Right.
hurts the Earth.
Right, but large grazing animals like dinosaurs per se also overgraze the land, and everything on the Earth impacts the Earth in a way that could be seen as negative because it's changing the environment from what it was.
But like we also saw in like a previous lesson in this class, was how overgrazers or like people using these types of animals can also like do something to help. Like, remember that one lesson like weeks ago where this guy had a TED talk about how man, I forgot what it was.
Improper grazing and like how the
yeah, so
cattle
you
could actually
yeah,
Mimicry of nature.
right.
Yeah, and how like letting cattle tramp through and like stomp on the grass allows more grass and more plant life to grow and thrive.
Right, because
And
that's what it's used to.
Isn't that just rotating cattle though?
Well,
Not-
yes,
not-
sort
yeah,
of. It's
sort
just grazing it in a more natural way, because that's what plants have always been doing.
Well,
Yeah.
I think of it as cattle rotation used to be to cattle rotation used to be where you'd get the cattle to alternate in areas of the field so the grass wasn't all chomped down to pieces. With this, it's more you get the cattle into areas that are more devoid of water, grass, nutrients, and they stomp down on the grass that they're taking too much. They fertilize the soil and all of that, and suddenly desert areas are revitalized into full-on grassland, and that where it's unrecognizable.
I think the sad thing was, though, is that we keep seeing TED Talks and different shows about how to fix the Earth, but they all come out years later, and nothing has really done major damage to the certain carbon emissions that are in the atmosphere or anything like that, and it takes years to fix.
Well, yeah, because a lot of people, I feel like, personally don't see the world like sort of crumbling down. They don't they just see it as, oh, it's just rising a little bit, but that's just for one person. It's not taking into account everyone else.
I mean, that's one of the biggest reasons for why we have these problems. People can't see the immediate cause and effect. If things happen immediately, then there'd be more notice and more action to stop. But that also beg the question on the extreme if just one simple action immediately translated to the end of the world.
Yeah, and that's why because education of these types of matters is like very important. Like there's people out here like thinking climate change is a conspiracy theory, in which we need to educate more of the people like how to like help their environment and help their world. There is no real Captain Planet. There is no some superhero team helping save the seals in the Arctic or anything. There's only us. We, as a race, as a whole species, need to help our world.
Yeah. I'd also like to point out that in addition to contributing how we can, I like to say that it's mostly each species is doing what it can to survive, and that's impacting the environment, and some are doing more harm than good. And it's essentially a tragedy of the commons across every species. And I'd like to think with those people who deny climate change and everything, I'd like to say the preparedness for reducing emissions and helping the environment, match it like a bulletproof vest. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So I'd rather be wrong and we're still standing than be right and it's too late to do anything about it.
Right, and branching off of what Demetrius said before, climate change in the past has been viewed as a conspiracy, and it has been that way because we haven't seen any immediate changes. So late 90s, early 2000s, when people were talking about climate change, scientists were protesting, lighting themselves on fire, all sorts of crazy stuff. Nobody really batted an eye because in their immediate life it didn't affect them. And now we're seeing ocean levels rising, we're seeing temperatures average drop or increase by decimals and whole percents, and we're seeing glaciers melt, we're seeing bacteria that have been harbored in these glaciers for millions of years now being brought to light because the world is changing actively, and now that we're able to see that, I feel like it's a lot harder for people to ignore climate change.
No, it's I feel like people still don't do anything about it.
Right.
Sure, some do, but the majority don't.
Right.
You said scientists lit themselves on fire?
Yes, there were groups of scientists that, must have been suicidal at this point because everyone was ignoring their lifetimes of studies and they were protesting by lighting themselves on fire and all sorts of different stuff. Bill Nye went rogue. I think everyone's seen that video. The planet's on fire.
Yeah, but he didn't light himself on fire.
Oh, that was just an example.
Well,
The more extreme cases get more publicity because, the more extreme you get to see
Right.
it, and more people are shocked about it.
Yeah, it probably gets people asking if he was willing to light himself on fire.
How bad is it going to get?
And they're a rational person with thoroughly studied and tested information. And that begs the question, and for the doubters, is this real and how bad is it?
Yeah.
Well, this is just me speaking out from an outward perspective. I feel like it's more of, it's not the problem for our generation, so let's leave it on to the next one.
And that's true. And I feel like it's kind of a stupid speech that everyone gives. It's the next generation that'll lead the world. Let's be honest, the next generation isn't doing anything better than we are. Quit making the speech. Try to fix it now.
Yeah, people don't genetically improve as they pop out. That's just not how it works. You have to be the change to see the change.
Now.
I got a question. I remember the videos that we saw in class where roots apparently absorb a lot of carbon for their growth and development. And I gotta say, I found that very interesting because I wasn't aware. I assumed it was a constant flow of between carbon and oxygen from absorption or emission by a plant, and so I never really thought that a plant would actively store the carbon it absorbs. Maybe it would generate more in the form of biomass, but let's just say I found it very surprising, and I'm wondering how that might be applied or in the current environmental preservation, or how it might affect the current situation.
Well, if you think about it, though, plants save us and kill us at the same time.
Yeah, and also, remember that other lesson from the same class, a couple of weeks ago, about, how this one girl was, this one woman was, doing genetic engineering of plant life in order to, further put carbon in, other...
deep in the roots?
Yes, deep in the roots.
That's what I was referring to.
Yeah. And that's a good option that we could also use, and we should explore more ideas to be able to do we should explore more ideas and good ideas, more different types of thinking outside the box to help improve our situation on their planet.
Well, while we're on the topic of classes, what class content do y'all feel is most relevant to the modern world, and would you please explain why?
I want to say the genetically modifying the plant roots to store more carbon, because we're currently our science and technology is continuing to advance, and it's gotten to the point where we can genetically modify new food sources and whatnot. I imagine back when the automobile was first coming out, we couldn't do that. So I want to say that would probably be a very efficient, if done right, and it would contribute greatly to cutting down on the carbon absorbed by greenhouse gases. But there is the issue of what would happen if there were too many of those plants. And it's like in a very extreme case, I imagine, what if they were absorbing carbon at levels that we were producing, and then they kept going up? Would that mean that we can no longer support plants that are taking in carbon, and it's pretty much, would that make it a reverse situation?
Plants go through reverse synthesis at nighttime.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not entirely certain, but I'm pretty sure genetic modification has been around for a while, because there's been seeds from like 100 years ago for tomatoes, and then compared to today.
I mean more of the modern stuff in a lab where you use gold to
splicing
forcefully inject.
Okay, I got you now.
Yeah,
But
Yeah, that's more like selective breeding to get the types of like
bingo.
types of things you want in a plant.
Anyone else got something to add?
So, but I feel like the problem wouldn't be making the roots deeper, because a problem that we have is there's not enough plants. People are cutting down trees, and that would also lower the oxygen rate. And that will, even if we have deeper roots, yes, it would take in more carbon, but I feel more plants would do a better job than just deeper roots.
I feel like it depends on the plant.
Is that really the modern solution you guys think is going to
No.
prevent climate change? No.
Well, a modern solution among several that are applied.
What do
It's
you guys
not
think is going to be?
I don't think it's going to be
Moving
one
to-
specific thing. It's probably going to be like a collection of different ideas and like methods to stop and slow down climate change to be able to help our world.
Well, I feel like a start to help climate change is by trying to move forward into all electric vehicles, because the more of that we have, the less carbon emission overall.
That's not true, though, because
It's not?
cars produce a
Oh,
fraction
right,
of
yeah.
the amount of emissions that factories to produce those cars make. So even if you're driving, even if you have a whole population of people driving electric cars, the factories needed to produce those electric cars greatly overpower.
Look at Tesla.
Yeah.
I remembered as soon as you said the factories.
Right, yeah.
But I feel like even if we think about what's going to be the final piece, we're not going to see it.
Absolutely.
Right.
We might be the ones to create it. That's the
We should at
point
least
here.
Create it, but we're not going to see it, though.
We should at least make sure the next generation is able to, or the one down the line that's eventually to. I'd very much like to be there to be a future where they're flying non-gas guzzling cars.
Can I say something, though? We need the next generation to not be as stupid as we are.
Honestly,
God's
if we
sake.
got rid of the
God's sake.
Starbucks, if we got rid of Starbucks and Chick-fil-A, the
And the
amount
pumpkin
of
spice
people
lattes.
driving in cars would greatly decrease in the mornings. Like, every college girl would no longer be driving 30 plus minutes every day to Starbucks. If we get rid of Starbucks and Chick-fil-A,
May
our
as well throw in
pollution will
Dunkin' Donuts
decrease.
for extra credit.
I mean,
That kind of begs the
seriously.
question: what would happen if you got rid of pumpkin spice?
What do you mean comes back? Where did that
I mean, like
get rid of. Get rid
Yeah,
of
like-
pumpkin spice.
Like, I just imagine you get rid of pumpkin spice latte and Starbucks, and the same thing happens. Far less car.
The pumpkin spice created global warming.
all right. Let's all get back to the class content here. So we had an answer from Alex. Demetrius, do you have any type of class content that you feel is relevant to the modern world today? And would you please explain?
What I think would be really relevant to think about is how each of our ecosystems are changing in slight ways, and how our world is changing as well. Like desertification, like how I mentioned that before. We should all like pay attention to how our world changes, and how if we can't stop it, to adapt to it, and if we can stop it, to prevent it. Like how many it like snowed in Texas, like for how long before the last couple years has it snowed? Like years and like decades, how much? And now here it goes after climate change. It's been like snowed twice in like 1 or 2 years.
I was frozen into my house for February. Yeah.
But we also did learn that the Sahara Desert goes green every like 10,000
And how we were like
years.
we were like
We
due
are
for
very
one.
long overdue,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
can credit that to climate change.
Oh, yeah. Now I feel bad for penguins and polar bears.
I mean, also like polar bears, they're like
Won't have
because
to
of
go back for
the
much longer.
because of the ice caps and like melting and like the whole like climate change thing. Polar bears have been going down, into like new territory, and like grizzly bears and like growler bears, and how polar bears and like grizzlies are like interbreeding and making a new species of hybrids.
That is actually a more dangerous bear than either one.
Right.
Like if a bear and a Wolverine had a baby.
That's not possible.
What would that be called?
I'm thinking of a bear and a badger.
Bearger.
All right.
Wait,
Except it's much larger.
Guys, we're talking about climate change.
Yeah.
Not
This
what
is
would
climate
happen.
change,
No. Not what would happen if radioactive shit got into the water.
But seriously, because
Making
climate
the frogs
change is
gay.
just a change. That's how it's always been. The world is just changing, and it's a matter of
If
what
we change
species.
with it.
Yes.
Okay,
If we're able to preserve with it, if we aren't, and what species will rise to change, because the Earth and life is going to preserve itself. It
The
always
gerbil.
has, and it always will.
The gerbil.
At least until things go too far.
Cockroaches
Well,
and
no,
Twinkies will
because-
survive.
You guys ever heard of the tardigrade?
Yes.
It's a water bear. I think I talked about it like twice in class.
I mean, yeah, it's almost like it's very resilient, but yes, there are ways to kill it. But tardigrades can like survive high heats, a lot of radiation, extreme cold, the vacuum of space. They go into a certain hibernation state until they're able to breathe again.
right.
They're like able to like adapt to many different environments, but yes, they still can be killed.
And
though.
when you
Sounds
think
like a
about
cockroach
natural,
and a tick had a baby.
pretty much. When you think of natural
Frieza from Dragon
disaster,
Ball.
like volcanic eruption, you see your primary, secondary successors emerge first, and that's bacteria, molds, lichens, all of that stuff. So, and that stuff is built to be resilient because that's the first life that we had on this planet. I know you might not necessarily agree because you said unless something horrible happens, but I really do firmly believe that even if the sun explodes and we get hit with a meteor and the climate reaches 400 degrees, I firmly believe that there are going to be organisms that are able to preserve themselves and repopulate the earth.
I agree.
Potentially, but I think if that does happen, it'll probably start with like microorganisms and like
Right, because that's how it
restart,
always
yeah.
has to start.
I don't know.
Crocodiles and alligators did it.
I mean, yeah, they're still here.
Sharks.
I don't think they're going anywhere.
Sharks as well, and trees.
Okay, but it'd start with algae and stuff like that.
More like microorganisms, and then became algae and whatever.
Ernesto, did you get your answer in?
For which question? We went like 5 minutes without a question.
Well, no, I asked if any of the class content that you've gone over is relevant to the modern world.
I feel like whenever you talk about GMOs and stuff like that, that's really what's relevant to us, just because our population's growing, the farmland, everything else is shrinking, so GMOs are more needed because you're able to grow more on a smaller land, but they also do have their drawbacks, so I feel like we need to correct those.
As someone who isn't exactly the smartest fellow, what's a GMO?
Genetically modified, so they basically make plants more resilient and able to take more, so harsher weather, certain insects, certain bugs that would go and usually try to eat the crop.
And it's for yield as well. You want more fruit in your watermelon than you do rind, and it wasn't always like that.
As well as higher nutrient content, and don't forget, it's probably cleaner than using pesticides and insecticides.
Well, yeah, but then you think of certain cancers that come with it.
That's another thing. Do you guys think pesticides and insecticides are the modern and correct solution?
No.
No.
Not really, especially since they create like bad runoff when they do that, and also like insecticides and pesticides also affect like different types of like insects that aren't your targeted pests, like honeybees and like different types of pollinators that help your crop. They'd instead hurt them, and then like I once did a research whatever for a class, and like how honeybees, if they're affected with like a pesticide, it probably could like reduce their reproduction rate, and like it take multiple generations for them to like fully recover from that one pesticide hit.
You know, speaking of runoff, I'm just waiting to see the three-eyed fish.
Oh,
You're thinking of The Simpsons, aren't you?
Either one.
they're predicting everything these days.
I mean, I think that already happened.
So
Yeah, it
if
did
pesticides isn't the answer, what do you think? What do you think we should do? Because it's clearly an outdated practice. We can all agree.
Well, I'm not exactly the one for complete solutions, but I feel like we should probably let nature take its course, because it's going to balance itself out in the end. If there's too many insects, its predators will grow and then take the insect population down. Then vice versa, the plants will be able to grow back and rinse and repeat.
Well, more like we're talking about crops and stuff like that. We don't really want more pest insects to like take control of our fields, like locust storms.
Well, it's a nice thought for nature takes its course. You're forgetting that currently, based on human interaction with the environment, we're mostly classified as an invasive species, and so we're throwing a wrench into the works of the natural process. So, is nature able to bounce back? It might, but it might also go into completely unpredictable areas, some which may be good, some which may be bad, kind of like mutations. So there is that to consider.
But if you think about that, where we are now, that would be a natural way for life now. So even if we leave it alone, global warming will still kind of just get us killed.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like this might be a good stopping point for everyone. This was a lovely conversation. I personally learned a lot. So, thanks again, Ernesto, Hailey, Alex, and Demetrius, for talking about these subjects.
You are so close to the microphone, my guy.
Whoops. But what do you think?
No. I'm trying to advocate for Ernesto. He's desperately trying to interject.
See you guys next time.
Square, not a port, not a port. Oh!